Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, I'm bringing you 3 deeply unsettling stories about fog, that thick, disorienting blanket that swallows landscapes, distorts sounds, and makes the familiar suddenly feel alien and threatening. These aren't stories about getting lost or having poor visibility. These are real experiences from real people who discovered that sometimes, when the fog rolls in, it brings something with it. Something that shouldn't be there. Before we dive in, I want to know, have you ever been caught in really thick fog? That feeling of complete disorientation, where you can't see more than a few feet in any direction, where every sound feels both too close and impossibly far away. Drop a comment and share your experience. Because what you're about to hear will make you think twice about driving through fog, about going for runs in low visibility, about venturing out onto the water when you can barely see what's in front of you. Alright, let's begin. And remember, every word of these stories is true. Story 1, Highway 101. It was 2022. I was living in the Bay Area at the time, Oakland specifically, and I'd driven up to visit my parents in Eureka for the weekend. If you've never driven Highway 101 along the Northern California coast, it's absolutely beautiful during the day. Rolling hills, glimpses of the Pacific, charming small towns. But at night, it's a completely different experience. Long stretches with no other cars, no cell service, barely any lights. The kind of road where you can drive for 30 minutes without seeing another human being. I left my parents' place around 8 p.m. on a Sunday, which was stupid in hindsight. I should have just stayed the night and driven back Monday morning. But I had an early shift at work and figured I'd rather just knock out the drive and sleep in my own bed. Famous last words, I guess. The first couple hours were fine. I was making good time, listening to a podcast, completely relaxed. The stretch I was on had narrowed down to a 2-lane road at that point. That's how most of rural 101 is once you get north of the bay. 1 lane each direction, winding through forests and along cliffsides. It was somewhere around Trinidad when the fog started rolling in. Fog on that part of the coast isn't unusual. It's actually expected, especially in summer. But this was different. Within maybe 5 minutes, visibility went from completely clear to barely being able to see 20 feet ahead of my car. It was like driving into a cloud. Or like someone had thrown a white sheet over my windshield. It was actually really bad. Worse than I'm describing. The kind of fog where your headlights just reflect back at you instead of illuminating the road ahead. I slowed down to maybe 35 miles per hour and kept going, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The smart thing would have been to pull off and wait it out. But there's really not a lot of places to stop safely on that stretch of 101. No rest stops, no wide shoulders, just narrow road with steep drop-offs on one side and dense forest on the other. And honestly, I just wanted to get home. I figured if I took it slow and careful, I'd be fine. People drive in fog all the time, right? Here's the thing about fog that thick, though, and any California driver knows this, it messes with your sense of space and time. You can't see landmarks. You can't tell how far you've traveled or how much further you have to go. You lose all your reference points. It's disorienting as hell, especially when you're already tired from a full weekend of family time. After another half hour or so of white-knuckle driving, I saw something on the side of the road. I say something because that's genuinely what it looked like at first, just a shape on the shoulder, maybe 50 feet ahead. A dark silhouette against the white fog. As I got closer, I could see it was a person. A man, based on the height and build. And he was just standing there on the shoulder, facing the road. He wasn't walking. Wasn't waving me down like he needed help. Wasn't looking at his phone or doing anything you'd expect from someone stranded on a dark highway. He was just standing there, completely still, facing the road like he was waiting for something. I slowed down even more as I approached, worried about clipping him if he suddenly stepped out into my lane. But he didn't move. Didn't even turn his head to watch my car pass. I got a good look at him as I went by, maybe 3 or 4 seconds of clear view. He was wearing dark clothes, maybe a jacket or hoodie. I couldn't see his face clearly because of the fog and darkness, but there was nothing particularly unusual about him. Just a guy standing on the side of Highway 101 at 10:30 at night in thick fog. My first thought was that maybe his car had broken down somewhere and he was waiting for a tow truck or a ride. That would make sense, right? Except I hadn't passed any cars on the shoulder. No vehicles at all. And there was no reason for him to be standing in that exact spot, in that exact position, staring at the road like that. I thought about turning around to ask if he needed help. But something about the whole situation felt wrong. Off. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and I've learned over the years to trust that feeling. It wasn't my problem. So I just kept driving. About 10 minutes later, though, I saw him again. I'm not exaggerating or misremembering. It was the same guy. Same build, same dark clothes, same unnatural stillness. The only difference was that this time, he was standing on the left side of the road instead of the right. But everything else was identical: the posture, the way he faced the road, the complete lack of movement. I actually said "what the hell" out loud to myself, my voice sounding too loud in the silent car. There was no way this guy could have gotten ahead of me. I was the only car on the road, I hadn't passed anyone, and no one had passed me. And there weren't any cross streets or shortcuts or parallel roads. Just Highway 101 winding through the fog. The only explanation was that it was a different person who just happened to look exactly like the first guy and happened to be standing in exactly the same weird way on a deserted highway in the middle of the night. But I knew that wasn't true. I didn't want to look at him as I passed. Every instinct told me to just keep my eyes straight ahead and get past him as quickly as possible. But I couldn't help myself. I had to confirm whether it was the same person. And the second I looked, the second I made that decision, his head snapped toward me. Our eyes locked. He was looking directly at me, staring at me with this intensity that made my stomach drop. And I couldn't look away fast enough. Seeing his head snap to follow my car as I passed was genuinely terrifying. It was too fast, too deliberate, too focused. I pressed down on the gas, speeding up to maybe 45 even though the fog was still dangerously thick. I needed distance between me and whatever the hell was happening back there. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him running after my car or appearing in the back seat or something equally impossible. The fog got even worse after that. I could barely see the center line. The white and yellow paint were just vague suggestions through the thick mist. I had no choice but to slow back down to maybe 30. I was legitimately afraid of driving off the road at that point. I kept trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Trying to come up with some logical explanation that would make it make sense. Maybe there were two guys who looked similar. Maybe they were trying to prank drivers. Maybe I was more tired than I thought and my brain was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't convince myself. I knew what I'd seen. My train of thought was violently interrupted when my headlights illuminated something directly ahead of me. There was a person standing in the middle of the road. In my lane. About 30 feet in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, my tires skidding slightly on the damp pavement. My car came to a stop maybe 10 feet from the figure. This time, the person was wearing a hood pulled low over their face. I couldn't see any features at all. Just darkness where a face should be. But I knew with absolute certainty, that it was the same guy. He wasn't moving. Just standing there in the middle of Highway 101, blocking my path, his head angled slightly downward like he was staring at my car. We sat there at a standstill. Me in my car with my foot still pressed hard on the brake. Him standing motionless in the fog. And even though I couldn't see his face, I could feel him looking at me. Could feel his attention focused entirely on me and my car. I didn't know what to do. Every horror movie I'd ever seen told me not to get out of the car. But I couldn't just sit there forever. I flashed my high beams at him a few times, hoping the bright light would startle him into moving or at least reacting somehow. Nothing. He didn't flinch, didn't step aside, didn't acknowledge the lights at all. I laid on my horn, 2 long blasts that echoed through the fog. Still nothing. That's when I realized I needed to get out of there immediately. This wasn't a person who needed help. This wasn't someone confused or stranded. This was a threat. I put the car in reverse, ready to back up and turn around, go back the direction I came from. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, my blood turned to ice. There was someone behind me. Another figure, standing in the middle of the road about 20 feet behind my car. Walking slowly toward me. I actually yelled "holy shit," even though there was no one to hear me. I was boxed in. Figure ahead of me, figure behind me, dense forest on both sides, nowhere to go. But I wasn't waiting around to find out what they wanted. I jerked the wheel hard to the left, pulling into the opposite lane to get around the figure in front of me. I pressed the gas and my car lurched forward. The hooded figure didn't move. Didn't step aside or react in any way. I passed within maybe 2 feet of him, close enough that if he'd reached out, he could have touched my car. I thought I was in the clear. I was accelerating, putting distance between myself and whatever the hell was happening back there. Then something hit my car from behind. Not a gentle tap. A violent impact that jolted the entire back end of my vehicle to the right. I heard this awful crunching sound, metal bending, plastic cracking, the unmistakable noise of significant damage. My car swerved slightly but I managed to keep control, gripping the steering wheel hard and steering back into my lane. My first thought was that I'd been rear-ended. That another car had come up behind me in the fog and crashed into me. But when I checked my mirrors, both rear view and side mirrors, there was nothing behind me. Nothing at all. No cars. No figures standing in the road. Just empty highway disappearing into fog. That somehow made everything so much worse. Because if there was no car behind me, what the hell had hit me hard enough to dent my bumper and send my car skidding? I wasn't sticking around to figure it out. I kept my foot pressed hard on the gas, going as fast as I dared with the limited visibility. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. The fog stayed thick for another 20 minutes. 20 minutes of terrified driving, constantly checking my mirrors, expecting to see those figures again. Finally, I hit the 101 interchange where the highway widens back to 4 lanes. The fog started to thin out, and I could actually see again. For the first time since Trinidad, I felt like I could breathe. My brain started to slow down, to come out of pure survival mode. And the more I calmed down, the more I started questioning what had happened. Here's the thing, I'd been driving for almost 4 hours at that point. I was exhausted. I'd been staring into thick fog for God knows how long, barely able to see anything, completely alone on a dark highway with no external stimulation. An extremely vivid hallucination didn't seem that far-fetched, honestly. Sleep deprivation can do crazy things to your brain. The fog and darkness could have created visual illusions that my tired mind interpreted as figures. And the impact? Maybe I'd hit a guardrail post or a mile marker while swerving in my panic. Maybe I'd clipped something on the side of the road without realizing exactly what it was. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot around 1:30 a.m., I'd half convinced myself that I'd hallucinated the whole thing. That my exhausted brain had conjured those figures out of fog and shadows and fear. I was ready to sleep it off, forget about it, chalk it up to a lesson learned about driving when you're too tired. But then I walked around to the back of my car to check for damage. The rear bumper was destroyed. There was a massive dent running almost the entire width of it, at least 3 feet across. The plastic was cracked and buckled inward. One of the taillights was shattered. This wasn't minor damage from scraping a guardrail. This was serious impact damage. Something had hit me, and hit me hard. I stood there staring at it for a solid 5 minutes, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. There wasn't any paint transfer, which there definitely would have been if I'd been hit by another car. When two vehicles collide, paint from one always transfers to the other. That's basic forensics. But my bumper was clean except for the damage itself. No scratches from metal, no colored paint streaks, nothing that would indicate what had hit me. If it wasn't another car that hit me, I had no idea what could have caused such considerable damage. A guardrail wouldn't have bent my bumper like that. A mile marker post wouldn't have had the surface area or force. I went inside, locked my door, and sat on my couch for probably an hour just trying to process everything. I did eventually call the police non-emergency line to report what I'd seen. Not because I expected them to do anything, but because I felt like someone should know. Like it should be documented somewhere. The officer I spoke to was professional but clearly skeptical. He took down my information, asked if I'd gotten any vehicle descriptions or license plates. There weren't any other vehicles, I explained. Just people standing on the highway. People standing on Highway 101 at night in the fog, he repeated back to me, his tone making it clear what he thought of my story. I know how it sounds, I said. I'm just reporting what happened. He said he'd file the report and that CHP would keep an eye on that stretch of road. I've thought about that night a lot over the past 4 years. I've gone through every possible explanation I could think of. The most rational explanation is the one I keep coming back to. I hallucinated the figures due to exhaustion and sensory deprivation from the fog. And in my panicked attempt to escape something that wasn't there, I swerved and hit something solid on the side of the road, a piece of road equipment, a large rock, something that left damage but no identifying marks. That's the explanation that makes the most sense. That's what I tell myself when I think about it. But here's what I can't reconcile, what keeps me up sometimes. The hallucination theory requires me to accept that I imagined 3 separate encounters with figures on the road over the course of 30 minutes while simultaneously experiencing a very real collision that left very real damage. The timing is what bothers me. If I was hallucinating, I should have been hallucinating the crash too. Or if the crash was real, why assume the figures weren't? I can accept that fog and exhaustion can create illusions. But for me to hallucinate one thing while simultaneously experiencing another real event happening at the exact same time? That's harder to accept. The fact that there was actual damage to my car has always made me think there was something more real, more physical, more deliberately malicious happening that night. Something that knew how to use fog as cover. Something that knew Highway 101 well enough to appear in multiple locations. Something that could hit a car hard enough to destroy a bumper without leaving any evidence of what it was. I don't drive Highway 101 at night anymore. And I definitely don't drive it alone. Not worth the risk. Because somewhere out there, on that stretch of foggy coastal highway, something stands on the shoulder waiting. Watching for headlights in the mist. And I have no intention of finding out what it wants. Story 2, the loop that never ended. This happened this past spring break, so we're talking only a few months ago. I'm still in college, I'm a senior now, and I went back to my hometown for the week like I always do during breaks. The problem with going home, though, is that there's genuinely nothing to do there. I grew up in one of those suburban towns that's technically close to a city but doesn't have any of the benefits of actually being in one. No bars, no nightlife, nothing really within walking distance except chain restaurants and strip malls. When I'm at school, I've always got something going on, parties, study groups, pick up basketball, whatever. But back home, it's a ghost town. The other issue is that none of my hometown friends have the same spring break schedule as me. I've got maybe 4 or 5 people I still keep in touch with from high school, and every single one of them was either still in class or had already had their spring break earlier in March. So I was looking at a full week of doing absolutely nothing, which I really wasn't thrilled about. I should probably also mention that I've been trying to cut back on some stuff lately, nicotine and alcohol mainly. Nothing too serious, but I've been vaping pretty heavily at school and drinking more than I probably should, and I figured a week at home was either going to make that worse or give me a chance to reset. I decided I was going to use the time to get back in shape. Work out every single day, lift in the mornings and run in the afternoons, keep myself busy so I wouldn't just sit around thinking about how bored I was. That's how I ended up going for a run on a random Tuesday afternoon. I remembered this loop I used to do back when I ran cross country in high school. It's exactly 3 miles from start to finish, starting and ending at my parents' house. Perfect distance for a tempo run. The route takes you through my neighborhood for maybe a quarter mile, then cuts into this wooded trail that winds through a small patch of forest before spitting you back out onto the street about a block from home. I've probably run that loop 1,000 times between freshman and senior year. I know every turn, every incline, every route that sticks up out of the path. The woods section is actually the best part. Running on pavement destroys your knees over time, but the trail through the woods is soft dirt and pine needles. It's quiet in there too, away from car noise and barking dogs. Just you and the trees and your breathing. So I headed out around 5 p.m. The sun wasn't going to set for another couple hours, so I wasn't worried about visibility or safety. It was a Tuesday afternoon in a suburban neighborhood. What could go wrong? What I did notice immediately, though, the second I stepped outside, was the fog. I don't know how to describe it other than to say it was thick in a way I'd never seen before in my entire life. And I've lived in this town for 18 years. It didn't look real. It looked like something out of a video game or a movie, like someone had added it in post-production. Everything past maybe 30 or 40 feet just dissolved into this gray-white haze. I actually stood on my driveway for a minute, just staring at it, trying to remember if I'd ever seen fog like this before. I couldn't recall a single instance. And it was weird because fog isn't common in my town at all. We're not near the coast or any large bodies of water. We get morning mist sometimes in fall, but thick fog? Never. I thought about skipping the run. Going back inside, playing video games, waiting for the fog to clear. But I'd already committed to working out every day. I'd already changed into my running clothes and stretched. And honestly, the fog was kind of cool in an eerie way. I talked myself into it pretty easily. The trail through the woods is completely straightforward, one path, no forks or diverging routes. I've been through there so many times I could probably navigate it blindfolded. Getting lost wasn't even a possibility. Plus, I had my Garmin watch on to track my pace and distance. If things got weird, I could always turn around and follow my GPS track back home. I started my workout, did the quarter mile through the neighborhood at an easy pace, and entered the woods. The fog was even thicker in there, which made sense since the trees blocked out a lot of the remaining daylight. I couldn't see more than 15 or 20 feet ahead of me at any given time. But the trail is really easy to follow, worn dirt path about 3 feet wide, clearly defined on both sides by undergrowth and trees. You'd have to deliberately leave the trail to get off it. For the first mile and a half, everything was completely normal. I was running a little slower than my usual pace because of the visibility, but it wasn't a big deal. Kind of peaceful, actually. Just me and the sound of my footsteps and breathing. I remember checking my watch around the 1 mile mark, 7:32 pace, heart rate 162, right where I wanted to be. Then I checked again at 1.5 miles, still on track, feeling good. The problem started around the 2.5 mile mark. At that point in the loop, I should have been approaching the end of the trail. The path curves sharply to the left, you go up a small hill, and then you're out, back on pavement, back in the neighborhood, less than a quarter mile from home. I know that section by heart. I've run through it hundreds of times over 4 years of high school cross country. But when I looked down at my watch and saw 2.5 miles, I was still deep in the woods. Trees on both sides, dirt path under my feet, no indication whatsoever that I was anywhere close to the exit. I figured my watch was being weird. It was at least 4 years old at that point. I'd gotten it as a birthday present sophomore year. The GPS probably wasn't as accurate anymore, or maybe it was getting interference from the dense tree coverage. The fog could have been messing with it too. That seemed like a reasonable explanation. So I just kept running, assuming I wasn't as far along the trail as I thought. My watch was wrong, that's all. I'd hit the exit point any minute now. But then I passed 3 miles. 3 miles is the entire loop. At 3 miles, I should be standing in my driveway. Or at the very least, I should be back on pavement, able to see houses. Instead, I was still surrounded by trees on both sides, still running on the same dirt path, still completely enclosed by fog and forest with no indication that I was anywhere near getting out. I stopped running. I'm not a paranoid person. I don't believe in supernatural stuff. There had to be a rational explanation for what was happening. Maybe I'd somehow gotten onto a different trail without realizing it? But I didn't remember seeing any turnoffs. And I'd been paying attention, watching the path. Maybe there was a fork I'd forgotten about? But no, there definitely wasn't. This trail has been maintained by the town parks department for years. It's a single loop, nothing complicated about it. I stood there catching my breath, trying to think logically about the situation. I checked my watch again, 3.1 miles. The number kept ticking up even though I was standing completely still, which confirmed that the GPS was definitely glitching. That was the only part that made sense. I didn't have a choice at this point. I could either keep going forward and hope I eventually hit the exit, or I could turn around and retrace my steps back to the trailhead where I'd started. The second option seemed smarter. If I ran back the way I came, I'd eventually get back to the neighborhood entrance. And from there, I knew exactly how to get home, just a quarter mile on familiar streets. So that's what I did. I turned around 180 degrees and started running back. The fog had gotten worse somehow, which shouldn't have been possible. It was now so thick I had to slow down significantly just to make sure I didn't accidentally run off the trail. I'd been running for maybe a mile in the reverse direction, so about 4 miles total at that point, when I heard something. Like I said earlier, it's usually dead quiet in these woods. Too small to have much wildlife. Occasionally you'd hear a bird or a squirrel, but mostly just silence. So hearing a sound out there, a loud, sustained sound, immediately got my attention. But the sound itself was so much worse than I could have anticipated. I'd never heard anything like it before. The closest I can come to describing it is a moan, but that's not quite right. It was lower than a moan, deeper. More like a drone or a hum. And it fluctuated, it would swell up, then dip back down, then swell up again. Almost like a siren, but human. Or humanish. I can't overstate how wrong it sounded. It wasn't someone calling for help, it didn't have that desperation or panic. And it didn't sound like someone in pain either, though it was disturbing enough to make me think of pain. It was just this sustained, wavering noise that seemed to have no purpose. No communication, no emotion. Just sound. And it was close. Maybe 50 feet away, off to my left side, somewhere in the fog beyond the trees. I started running faster without even consciously deciding to. Pure instinct. But you have to remember that I'd already been running for over 4 miles at that point, including steep hills and soft terrain. I was tired. My legs were heavy. I could only go so fast. And the more tired I got, the more scared I became. Because fear plus exhaustion is a terrible combination. Your body wants to rest, but your brain is screaming at you to run faster, and you end up in this panic state where you can't think clearly. The sound didn't stop. It kept going, that awful droning moan following me through the fog. And here's what made it absolutely terrifying. No matter how fast I ran, the sound stayed at the same distance. Never got closer, but never got farther away either. Whatever was making that noise was keeping pace with me. I kept glancing over my shoulder as I ran, trying to see something, anything, through the fog. But there was nothing. Just gray mist and trees and that horrible sound. Every time I looked back, I expected to see some kind of figure following me. But the fog was too thick. I couldn't see more than 15 feet. Which meant that whatever was out there could be 15 feet behind me, and I'd never know until it was too late. I ran for what felt like forever. My lungs were burning. My legs were cramping. I had a stitch in my side that felt like someone was stabbing me. But I couldn't stop. Not with that thing following me. Finally, I saw a break in the trees ahead. The trailhead. The exit. I put everything I had left into a final sprint and burst out of the woods onto the street. I was gasping for air, bent over with my hands on my knees, on the verge of throwing up from the exertion. But I'd made it out. I was back in the neighborhood, back in civilization, back where there were houses and streetlights and safety. The droning sound had stopped the moment I exited the woods. Just cut off completely, like someone had flipped a switch. I turned around to look back at the trailhead, still breathing hard. And that's when I saw it. There was something standing at the entrance to the trail. Just inside the tree line, maybe 20 feet from where I was standing on the sidewalk. I say something because I genuinely don't know what else to call it. It was a shape. A dark mass. A silhouette that didn't quite look right. It was tall, way taller than me. And I'm 6'1". This thing had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. The proportions were wrong too. Too thin, too elongated. It wasn't moving toward me or away from me. It was just standing there at the edge of the woods, right at the boundary between the trail and the street. Watching me. I couldn't see any features, no face, no details. Just a dark shape against the slightly less dark fog. But I could feel it watching me. Could feel its attention locked onto me like a physical weight. And then it started swaying. Slowly. Side to side. Like it was being moved by wind, except there was no wind. I stood there frozen, unable to move or look away, for what was probably only a few seconds but felt like hours. Then my brain finally kicked back into gear and I ran. I turned and sprinted toward my house, not caring about pacing or form or anything except getting away. I didn't look back. Couldn't make myself look back. I ran the final quarter mile faster than I've ever run in my life and didn't stop until I was inside my parents' house with the door locked behind me. That was about 3 months ago now. I'm back at school, back to my normal routine. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about that afternoon. I can't get the image out of my head, that dark silhouette standing at the edge of the woods, swaying back and forth. And that sound. God, that awful droning sound that followed me through the fog. I told my parents about what happened, obviously. They both seemed convinced it was just a tall person, maybe a creepy guy trying to scare me, or possibly someone with bad intentions who was going to attack me until he realized I was faster than him. My dad suggested it might have been someone on drugs, behaving erratically. My mom thought maybe it was a prank, kids from the high school messing with people on the trail. Those explanations would make sense. They are logical, rational, grounded in reality. But I don't believe them. How could a person make that sound while running to keep pace with me? That droning, fluctuating moan that never faltered or changed pitch. You can't sustain a sound like that while running at full speed. It's physically impossible. And the height. I got a good look at that thing standing at the trailhead. It was at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. That's not normal human height. That's enormous. Plus the way it moved, or didn't move. Just standing there, swaying slightly. Not breathing hard after running. Not calling out or reacting to me. Just existing at the edge of the woods. I don't know what was in those woods that day. And I probably never will. But I know this, I will never run that trail again. Never go into those woods again, not alone, not with friends, not in broad daylight, not ever. Because whatever I encountered out there in the fog, it wasn't human. And it's probably still there, waiting in the trees, for the next person to run past on a foggy afternoon. Story 3, The Rower in Willapa Bay. This happened about 6 years ago, late September. My buddy Edwin and I had been talking about kayaking Willapa Bay for probably 2 years at that point, and we finally locked in a weekend to actually do it. If you're not familiar with the area, Willapa Bay is this massive tidal estuary on the Washington coast. It's something like 25 miles long, covers over 100 square miles. It's mostly oyster farms and wildlife refuge, and on a clear day, it's honestly one of the most peaceful places I've ever been. The weekend we picked was not a clear day. Neither Edwin nor I were amateurs. We'd both been kayaking since we were kids. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, it's basically a rite of passage. And Edwin had actually worked as a kayak guide for a few summers during college, taking tourists out on scenic paddles around the San Juan Islands. We knew what we were doing. That's important context for what I'm about to tell you, because I don't want anyone thinking we were just a couple of inexperienced idiots who got spooked because we didn't understand how tides and fog work. We launched early Saturday morning from a put-in spot near Nakata on the east side of the bay. The fog was already thick when we arrived around 7:30 a.m., but we figured it would burn off by mid-morning like it usually does on the coast. Pacific fog is notorious for rolling in at night and clearing out by 10 or 11 a.m. once the sun warms things up. We had all the proper equipment: GPS units, compass, marine radio, life jackets, dry bags with emergency supplies. This wasn't a casual paddle. We'd planned it properly. The plan was to paddle out toward Long Island, this protected wildlife area in the middle of the bay, maybe do some bird watching, have lunch on one of the sandbars if the tide was right, and head back before the afternoon tide shift. Simple, safe, well within our skill level. The first hour or so was fine. The fog muffled everything in that way coastal fog does, making the world feel smaller and more intimate. You feel like you're paddling through cotton, and sounds get weird, sometimes amplified, sometimes completely absorbed. We couldn't see more than maybe 40 feet in any direction, but that's not unusual for foggy morning paddles. We were staying close together, checking our GPS bearing every few minutes to make sure we were heading in the right direction. No big deal. It was probably around 9 a.m. when I first heard something that made me stop paddling. It was a splashing sound, rhythmic, regular. At first, I thought it was Edwin. We were paddling in loose formation, him about 15 feet to my left, and I figured he was just adjusting his stroke or something. But when I glanced over, his paddle was resting across his kayak. He'd stopped paddling too and was looking around, trying to locate the source of the sound. "You hear that?" he called over to me quietly. I nodded. "Yeah. What is it?" We both stopped paddling completely and just drifted there, listening carefully. It was the sound of oars. Not paddles, oars. I say that specifically because oars and paddles make very distinct sounds, and I know the difference after years of being on the water. We were using kayak paddles, which make a softer splashing sound as the blade enters and exits the water. But oars, the kind you'd use on a rowboat, make a different sound. More of a creak as they move in the oarlocks, than a splash as they pull through the water. Creak splash, creak splash, creak splash. Very distinctive rhythm. This was definitely someone rowing a boat. And they didn't sound too far away, maybe 100 feet off to our right, somewhere in the fog. "Probably just another boater," Edwin said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Maybe someone checking their crab pots." That made sense. There were commercial fishermen who worked the bay, and it wasn't uncommon to see small boats out early checking traps and pots. But the fog was thick enough that we couldn't see them. And here's the thing about being on water in heavy fog: sound travels strangely. Sometimes things sound much closer than they actually are. Sometimes distant sounds seem to come from the wrong direction entirely. The fog and the water create these weird acoustic effects. We waited for a minute, expecting whoever it was to either call out or appear through the fog. Standard etiquette when visibility is low on the water is to announce yourself, let other boaters know where you are so you don't accidentally collide. But the rowing just continued at the same steady pace. Creak splash, creak splash, creak splash. Over and over. No variation in rhythm or speed. "Hello?" Edwin called out, his voice carrying across the water. "Anyone there?" No response. The rowing didn't stop, didn't speed up or slow down. Didn't change at all. "Maybe they can't hear us," I suggested. "Or maybe they're wearing headphones or something." Edwin looked skeptical but didn't argue. We started paddling again, figuring we'd either come across them eventually or they'd pass by us and we'd see them. But here's where things started getting weird. Over the next 20 minutes, that rowing sound never got any closer. And it never got any farther away either. It stayed at the exact same volume, the exact same distance, no matter which direction we paddled or how fast we went. At first, I didn't really notice. We were focused on navigating, checking our GPS, making sure we were heading toward Long Island and not drifting off course with the current. But after a while, I became acutely aware that I'd been hearing that same rhythmic creak splash for over 20 minutes straight, and it hadn't changed at all. "Edwin," I said quietly, "have you noticed the rowing hasn't gotten closer or farther?" He stopped paddling and listened for a moment. "Yeah," he said slowly. "That's weird. How long has it been going?" "I don't know. 20 minutes? Half an hour?" We sat there in our kayaks, just drifting and listening. The sound continued at the same steady pace it had been maintaining this entire time. No breaks, no pauses, no variation whatsoever. "That's a really consistent rowing pace," I said, trying to sound casual even though I was starting to feel uncomfortable. "Like, impressively consistent." Edwin didn't respond right away. When he did speak, his voice was tight. "Nobody rows that steadily for that long. Your arms would get tired. You'd slow down or speed up or take a break." "Maybe it's a really experienced rower," I suggested, not believing it myself. "For half an hour straight? Without any variation at all? That's not human. That's mechanical." We both fell silent, listening to that endless creak splash, creak splash, creak splash coming from somewhere in the fog. I wanted to leave. Every instinct was telling me we should turn around, head back to shore, get off the water. Something about this wasn't right. But Edwin was already adjusting our course, angling us slightly to the right, toward where the sound seemed to be coming from. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I want to see what's making that sound," he said. "Maybe it's some kind of automated boat? Like a research buoy or something." That actually made some sense. Scientists use all kinds of equipment in estuaries. Maybe there was some kind of automated device out here that was creating the rowing sounds as part of its operation. We paddled toward the sound. And for the first time since we'd started hearing it, the sound seemed to get slightly louder. We were closing the distance. Then, for just a moment, maybe 3 seconds, the fog thinned out enough that I could see about 60 or 70 feet instead of 40. And there it was. A small rowboat, maybe 12 feet long, wooden, painted dark. And there was definitely someone in it, sitting at the oars. I could see the silhouette of a person pulling the oars through the water in that rhythmic motion. But then the fog closed back in, and they were gone from sight again. "Did you see it?" Edwin asked urgently. "Yeah. Old rowboat, one person." "Did you see who it was?" "No. Just a silhouette." We kept paddling toward where we'd seen the boat, but the sound was getting quieter again. Whoever it was seemed to be moving away from us now. "Hello?" Edwin shouted, much louder this time. "Can you hear us?" The rowing continued. No response, no acknowledgement. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop. "Edwin, the direction of the sound is changing." "What do you mean?" "It was off to our right. Now it sounds like it's behind us." We both turned in our kayaks, looking back toward where we'd come from. And sure enough, the creek splash sound was now coming from that direction. "How did they get behind us?" Edwin asked. "We would have seen them pass. Unless they hadn't passed us. Unless they'd circled around somehow. But that made no sense. We would have heard the rowing sound moving, heard it pass by us." "Let's just go," I said. "This is freaking me out." Agreed. We started paddling toward the eastern shore, away from the sound, moving as quickly as we could without exhausting ourselves. But the rowing sound followed us. No matter which direction we turned, no matter how we adjusted our course, that sound stayed with us. Always at the same distance, always at the same volume, that endless mechanical creek splash, creek splash, creek splash. Edwin and I weren't talking much anymore. We were both focused on paddling, on getting to shore, on getting the hell away from whatever was out there with us. At one point we shifted our course slightly north, trying to angle toward where we thought the boat launch was, and the fog thinned out just for a moment, just enough for me to catch another glimpse of the rowboat. It was closer this time. Maybe 30 feet away. And I could see the person more clearly. They were wearing something dark, a coat or cloak, I couldn't tell. Their back was to me as they rowed. But something about their posture was wrong. Too stiff. Too mechanical. Like a mannequin going through the motions. Then the fog closed in again. "We need to get to shore," Edwin said, his voice shaking slightly. "Right now." We paddled harder, faster, our arms burning with exertion but neither of us caring. We just needed to get to land, to solid ground, to get away from whoever or whatever was following us through the fog. The rowing sound continued for another 10 minutes. Then, without any warning, the fog started to lift. It didn't clear completely, but it thinned dramatically. Suddenly we could see maybe 100 yards in every direction instead of just 40 feet. And that should have made me feel better. Should have made us both feel safer. But the first thing I did was look around for the rowboat. And it was gone. I spun in my kayak, checking every direction. Open water, gray sky, distant shoreline. But no boat. No person rowing. Nothing. Where did it go? Edwin asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "I don't know." We kept scanning the water, looking for any sign of the rowboat. But the bay was empty. Just us and the fog and the sound of small waves lapping against our hulls. And the rowing sound had stopped completely. No creek splash, no mechanical rhythm. Just silence. The shoreline came into view about 5 minutes later, and I've never been so relieved to see land in my entire life. We paddled straight for it, not even bothering to look for a good landing spot. We just wanted off the water. I hit the shallows first and jumped out into knee-deep water. It was cold. Pacific water is always cold, but I barely registered it. I just wanted to get my kayak onto the beach and be done with this whole experience. Edwin pulled his kayak up next to mine, and for a minute or two, neither of us said anything. We just stood there on the beach, catching our breath, looking back out at the bay. The fog was still lifting slowly. And there were still no boats visible anywhere on the water. Edwin had wandered a little ways down the beach while I was securing my kayak. I heard him call my name, his voice strange. "What?" I called back. "Come here. Look at this." I jogged over to where he was standing, and immediately saw what had caught his attention. Footprints. Wet, barefoot footprints leading out of the water and up onto the sand. They were fresh. You could see where water was still pooled in the depressions. Whoever made them had walked out of the water very recently. Within the last few minutes, probably. But here's the thing, the footprints didn't just lead up to the beach. They came out of the water, walked up the sand for maybe 10 feet, then turned and followed the shoreline to our left, heading in the direction we'd just paddled from. After maybe 30 yards, the footprints curved back toward the water, crossed the beach again, and disappeared into the tree line. I followed the path with my eyes, trying to make sense of it. Where did they come from? Edwin asked. I don't know. The footprints were definitely coming from the water. From the bay. But we'd been the only ones out there. We would have seen someone swimming or wading. And who swims in the Pacific in September? The water temperature is maybe 55 degrees. You'd get hypothermia. Edwin. Those prints are going the direction we came from. I know. Whoever made them, they walked along the beach in the direction of where we launched. Like they were following the shore. Yeah. Neither of us wanted to say what we were both thinking. That whoever or whatever had been in that rowboat had somehow gotten to shore before us, walked past this spot, the exact spot where we'd landed, and disappeared into the woods. It didn't make sense. It was impossible. But there were the footprints, right in front of us. I want to see where they came from, I heard myself say. What? No. No way. Just back to where they entered the water. I just want to see. Edwin looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Why? What's that going to accomplish? I don't know. I just need to. He didn't want to come with me, but he also didn't want to stand there alone. So after about 30 seconds of back and forth, he reluctantly agreed to walk with me. We followed the footprints backward along the shoreline, keeping them to our left, moving slowly and carefully. After maybe 2 or 3 minutes of walking, I saw it. Maybe 50 yards ahead, pulled up onto the sand at an angle, was a small wooden rowboat. The wood was dark, almost black from age or water damage. The oars were resting inside it, crossed over each other. It was the same boat. I was absolutely certain of it. The size, the color, the shape, everything matched what I'd glimpsed through the fog. And next to it, leading away from it and continuing down the beach in the direction we'd been walking from, was the trail of barefoot prints. I started walking toward the boat instinctively, drawn by morbid curiosity. But Edwin grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. We're leaving, he said, his voice firm and final. Right now. I don't care what's in that boat or who was rowing it. We're done. Something about the way he said it, the barely controlled panic in his voice, snapped me out of my trance. He was right. Whatever this was, we didn't need to know more. We'd already seen too much. We turned and walked quickly back to where we'd left our kayaks. Edwin was practically jogging by the end, and seeing him that scared made me scared too. We got to our kayaks, dragged them back into the water, and paddled away from that beach as fast as we physically could. And I didn't look back. I was too afraid of what I might see standing on the shore watching us leave. We made it back to the launch site about an hour later. Loaded our kayaks onto Edwin's truck in complete silence. Drove back to Seattle without discussing what had happened. It's been 6 years since that morning on Willapa Bay, and Edwin and I have never been kayaking together since. We're still friends, still keep in touch. But neither of us has any desire to get back out on the water. I've thought about that experience constantly over the years. I've tried to come up with rational explanations. The best case scenario is that someone was pranking us. Maybe they knew kayakers used that area and decided to mess with people by rowing around in the fog making spooky sounds. But that doesn't explain how they kept perfect pace with us for over an hour without variation. Doesn't explain how they got to shore before us. Doesn't explain the bare footprints or how they knew exactly where we'd land. Here's what I keep coming back to, what I can't rationalize away. We were on the water for over 2 hours. We paddled in multiple directions, changed course several times, and eventually made a straight line for shore when the fog lifted. Whoever was in that rowboat would have had to follow our exact movements in a slower vessel, get to shore before us somehow, walk down the beach past the exact spot where we'd end up landing, leave their boat there, and walk into the woods. All while maintaining that perfectly mechanical rowing rhythm for over an hour without a single break or variation. It's impossible. There's no human explanation that accounts for everything we saw and heard. So what was it? Who was rowing that boat? And why were they following us through the fog? I don't have answers. And honestly, I don't think I want them. All I know is this: I will never paddle Willapa Bay again. We'll never go out on foggy water again if I can help it. Because somewhere out there in the fog, on bays and estuaries and lakes and rivers, something rose through the mist. Something that doesn't get tired, doesn't stop, doesn't respond to calls or questions. Something that follows. And if you hear the sound of oars in the fog, I suggest you turn around and paddle to shore as fast as you possibly can. Before whatever's doing the rowing decides to catch up. 3 people. 3 encounters with fog that brought something impossible, something wrong, something that shouldn't exist. I want to thank everyone who shared their experiences. Fog is one of nature's most disorienting phenomena, and sometimes, it hides things that we're better off not seeing. If you found these stories compelling, please like and subscribe. And if you've ever experienced something strange in the fog, something you couldn't explain, drop your story in the comments. These experiences need to be documented, need to be shared, need to be believed. Stay safe out there. Check weather conditions before traveling. Don't go into fog alone if you can help it. And remember, sometimes the things we can't see are far more dangerous than the things we can. Until next time.